Phantom Doubleday Del Audio Publishing presents Living the Simple Life with Elaine St. James.
I first made the decision to start living a simpler life in 1990. I had spent 12 years as a real estate investor, working 10-hour days buying, refurbishing, managing, and selling investment properties. During the previous year, I had organized a real estate seminar business, had written a book on real estate investing, and had just completed a national media tour to promote it. My life was ruled by a black leather time management system that weighed 5 pounds. My day was driven by the classic prioritizing question, what's the best use of my time right now? Sometime after college, I began, as many of us did, to work at 2 speeds, faster and fastest. I moved at this pace from 6 in the morning until 7 or 8 o'clock at night for more years than I care to count. I had become a fairly typical urban professional on my own fast track. Though my husband Gibbs, who is older and wiser than I am, was never technically a yuppie, his life was complicated by the fact that he was married to one, and he too maintained a full career schedule as a magazine editor while he wrote adventure novels. He was also an active volunteer with various community organizations. In addition to our careers, we had all the other duties and responsibilities we all have to maintain our lives. Though my 2 stepsons were now out on their own, we still had 4 cats and a fairly busy social life. The gods must have been smiling on me in the summer of 1990. I stopped for 5 minutes in the middle of July that year, and in a quiet moment, I looked at my time management system as though I were seeing it for the first time. As I went over the list of phone calls I had to make, the people I had to see, the places I had to go, and all the things I had to do, all of a sudden a light bulb went on. I realized my life had become too complicated, and I made the decision right then and there to start simplifying it. I finally reached a point where keeping up such a hectic pace no longer seemed worth it. It occurred to me that we had, through long hours and a lot of hard work, achieved a modicum of success. We had many of the trappings of the modern lifestyle, but we didn't have the time or the energy to enjoy them. Even worse, we had little time for each other and practically no time for ourselves. A large part of the dissatisfaction for me was that I had never particularly enjoyed my work. I had continued to do it because I hadn't a clue what else I might be able to do. It was unthinkable at that point that I could change my career or even cut back on my work schedule. But I decided there were many other areas where we could cut back. My first objective was to create some breathing space so we could start to figure out how we could do things differently. And so we began the process of simplifying. In the first months, we eliminated a lot of the clutter that was taking up our time and energy, and we moved to a smaller home. Over the next couple of years, we made significant changes in our household routines, our social lives, our entertainment patterns, our civic and volunteer schedules, our financial picture, our personal lives, and eventually even in our work lives. I then got the idea to write a book on the things we'd done to scale back. That book, Simplify Your Life, 100 Ways to Slow Down and Enjoy the Things That Really Matter, was published in 1994. It outlines the steps Gibbs and I took to simplify. In the process of simplifying, we freed up close to 30 hours a week. This gave me the opportunity to begin the daunting prospect of thinking about making career changes and to address some emotional, psychological, and spiritual issues that had been bubbling beneath the surface of my fast-paced life. I then decided to write a book that would discuss those issues. Inner Simplicity, 100 Ways to Regain Peace and Nourish Your Soul, was published in 1995. When we first made the decision to simplify, we had no idea that we were in the beginning phase of a major national trend. We simply wanted to get out from under the complications that 12 fast-paced years had generated. If you too are thinking about simplifying or have already started the process, you're not alone. According to the Trends Research Institute in Rhinebeck, New York, a privately funded organization that forecasts and tracks changes in our culture, simplifying is one of the leading movements of the decade. A 1995 nationwide survey of a cross-section of Americans revealed that close to 30% of the respondents had voluntarily downshifted and were working fewer hours for less pay so they could spend more time with their families. Numerous other surveys have shown that anywhere from 60 to 80% of those questioned would be willing to accept a reduction in pay if they could work fewer hours. This represents a major nationwide change in personal priorities. It says that many of us have had enough of the fast-paced, hard-working lifestyle that has become the norm over the last decade. It says millions of Americans want to live their lives differently. When I wrote Simplify Your Life, I thought I was writing it for maturing yuppies who, like Gibbs and me, had been seduced by both the work and the consumer culture in recent years, and who had lost sight of the important things. But based on the letters I receive from readers around the country, the desire to simplify crosses generational, economic, educational, and professional lines. I hear from teenagers, single men and women, married couples, retirees, the affluent, the not-so-affluent, and people from every walk of life, teachers, nurses, computer specialists, actors, journalists, artists, psychotherapists, legislators, lawyers, corporate executives, police officers, students, and media personalities. They are among the millions of Americans who are reducing the hours they spend earning a salary, their housing requirements, and the money they spend on goods and services. They, like Gibbs and me, are realizing that they've given up too much in the effort to have it all. The primary objective for most of them is to have more time for their life dreams or for the people they love, and for doing the things they really want to do. When you stop to think about it, it's not surprising that so many of us want to simplify. Never before in the history of mankind have so many people been able to have so much, go so many places, and do so many things. We've worn ourselves out trying to have it all. Now we're ready to look at other options. In this program, we'll explore what simple living means to different people and look at what complicates our lives, what we can eliminate, and ways we can play the game differently. I'll outline some ways to get started, especially for those who think their lives are too complicated to even think about simplifying, and for those who haven't stopped long enough to get in touch with what really matters to them. I'll point out some things Gibbs and I have learned about having more time and suggest how to deal with people who simply don't understand the desire to simplify. In my experience, two major issues complicate our lives above all else. The first is our ongoing battle with consumerism and the stuff we've accumulated. I'll share what we've learned about letting go of a lot of that stuff and some of the ways we've dealt with the media-generated imperative to consume, consume, consume. The second challenge is the tendency for many of us to say yes when we'd really like to say no, a habit that affects all areas of our lives. I'll discuss ways we've used to approach this. One of the great dichotomies that many of us face is that because our lives are so complicated, we don't have time for ourselves, and at the same time we often keep our lives complicated, so we won't have to address some of our inner issues. I'll talk about this and some ways we can bring our outer and inner lives together. Each passing year leaves us with personal, household, and lifestyle choices that can either simplify our lives or complicate them even further. Finally, I'll share my experiences as well as some readers' ideas about these choices. An interviewer recently asked me if I was glad I had made all these changes and had simplified my life. I said I was, absolutely. Then she asked me if I'd do it again. I said, yes, absolutely. There's no way I'd ever want my life to be so complicated again. Then she asked if I would have simplified if someone else had suggested it to me before I came to the decision on my own. My initial reply was, probably not. But as I thought about it some more, I realized that if someone had outlined easy changes I could make which would free up some time without derailing the rest of my schedule, I believe I would have paused long enough to consider them. If someone had been able to show me that just by tweaking my daily routine I would have had more time each week, not to work more, but to play more and relax more, I like to think I have been open to that possibility. If someone had pointed out that reducing the hours I spend in the office each day could actually make me more productive, I would have been willing to experiment with that. If I could have seen that freeing up more time for leisure would help me open up to my creativity, which in turn would make it possible for me to move away from a career I'd never been happy in and into one that is now a constant source of joy, I might have been skeptical, but because hope springs eternal, I'd have sought out that leisure time. And if someone had convinced me that eventually I could use some of my newfound time to face the more difficult challenges I'd spent years avoiding, such as conquering my fears and learning to forgive, and that doing those things in turn would free me up for unprecedented personal growth, I'd like to think I'd have gone for it. So that's what I'd like to do for you here. I want to give you a glimpse of the tremendous freedom you'll experience when you start to eliminate some of the day-to-day complexities. You'll see that simplifying is not necessarily about getting rid of everything we've worked so hard for. It's about making wise choices among the things we now have to choose from. It's about recognizing that trying to have it all has gotten in the way of enjoying the things which truly do add to our happiness. So it's about deciding what's important and gracefully letting go of the things that aren't. Simplifying is not necessarily about moving to Walden Pond and sending the laundry home to Mother. It's about simplifying our lives right where we are. It's about learning to reduce the laundering chore along with all the other chores and frequently self-imposed obligations so we can begin to make the contributions we all, in our heart of hearts, want to make to our family, to our community, to our environment, and to the world. If you've already begun taking steps to simplify, this program will help you continue on your way, perhaps with some new ideas you may not have thought of, and possibly with some different ways of thinking about the process. If you've been living the simple life, I hope you'll find here some reinforcement and even validation for the sometimes easy, sometimes difficult, but almost always rewarding choices you've made. When you start slowing down and cutting back and creating time, real time, for yourself, the important things become obvious. Once you simplify your life, you begin to do your best work. You can start perhaps all over again to live your best life, whatever that is for you. Simplifying is not a panacea. It won't solve all the problems of our lives or of the world, but it's a good beginning. The simple life. What living the simple life means for me and Gibbs. When my husband Gibbs and I first made the decision to simplify our lives, we weren't sure what living the simple life would mean for us. In many respects, we had a good life. We just didn't have the time or the energy to enjoy it. We knew we didn't want to drop out. We weren't ready to move to the woods. We didn't want to give everything away. We're too young to retire and not in a financial position to do so anyway. Our challenge was to create a simple life right where we were, in a town we love, with the people we care about. For us, simplifying meant, among other things, getting rid of possessions that were no longer adding anything to our lives. It was about moving to a smaller, easier-to-maintain home. It was about cutting back on household routines, the cooking and the grocery shopping and the house cleaning and the laundry and the yard maintenance and the errand running, and using the time we'd freed up to watch the sunset or to putter in the rose garden or just to spend time with family and friends. It was about changing our buying patterns, not only to reduce our consumption of the Earth's resources, but to minimize the stuff we have to take care of, insure, and provide space for. It was about learning to say no to many of the social and civic activities we'd felt obligated to do, so we'd have time to enjoy the silence or to start one of our creative projects or just do nothing. For Gibbs, who loves his work, it was about eliminating a stressful daily commute so his workday wasn't so exhausting and so we'd have more time together. He also wanted more time for his writing and his volunteer interests. For me, it was about going from an exhausting 10 and 12-hour workday in a career that never fed my soul to a 6 to 8-hour day of writing that really thrills me. It was about gradually changing our daily routines so that rather than having to rush mindlessly to begin our respective work schedules, we now have 4 uninterrupted hours to read, to contemplate, to take long walks along the beach together, maybe to chat on the phone with a friend, and possibly to romp with the dogs before we start our workday. We're still in the early stages of simplifying, so we don't yet know all the benefits that will come from continuing to live the simple life, but we see this as a big improvement over the hectic lives we've been living for far too many years. Some other views of the simple life. Keep in mind that simplification is all relative. For example, Oprah Winfrey simplified her life by unloading via charity auction several thousand of the exquisite outfits she has worn on her daily television show for the past 10 years, and by figuring out that she can turn off the ringer on her home phone so she doesn't have to take calls if she chooses not to. Barbra Streisand simplified her life by getting rid of 5 of her 7 houses and her Tiffany lamp collection. For David, a 42-year-old teacher who told his story at a presentation I gave in San Diego, simplifying means keeping his possessions down to 8 boxes of personal items and 1 lamp to read by. David uses his master's degree in education to tutor the children of affluent families. He decided 20 years ago to limit his work schedule to 2 hours a day, 4 days a week, which provides him all the income he needs to maintain his simple life. A good deal of the rest of his time is spent doing volunteer work with underprivileged kids. For Ellen, a 41-year-old single attorney who wrote to me from the Northwest, simplifying is about selling her home and unloading her private practice so she can take time off to figure out what she wants to do next. Based on the letters I get and the stories I hear, simplifying means taking steps to reduce the stress that has become a permanent fixture in our lives. Sometimes it means exploring new career options. Sometimes it means quitting our job altogether. But almost always it means cutting back on our heavy work schedules. Sometimes it means moving to a smaller home or moving across country, and sometimes it means simply living differently in the space we have. Sometimes it means getting rid of everything, but more often it means merely cutting back on the stuff we've accumulated and changing our spending habits. And sometimes simplifying means searching for balance between our needs for a satisfying career and to spend time with our families and to nourish our inner selves. For most of us, simplifying is any one or a combination of steps we can take to get back in control of our lives. A corporate yuppie approach to simplifying. Dear Elaine, I enjoyed Simplify Your Life and wanted to respond. We, too, have made a drastic lifestyle change. We were yuppies at major corporations and enjoyed the fast-paced life in Dallas, Texas. Then the kids came. They are now 2 years old and 7 months old, and they keep me busy. I have no time for fussiness or complications. People ask me how I do it, and I reply, simplicity and organization. The first thing I did when we decided to simplify was to quit my job. That step in itself eliminated daycare and transportation hassles. I'm trying to get another career going from my home. I feel so free from our past stresses. The thing that makes me happiest is that I'm only 31 years old and learned this early in the game. The hardest thing is trying to explain our lifestyle to people my age because they think our downscaling was motivated by a negative, such as my quitting my job, or because we can't afford things. It's the opposite, but people don't get it. We don't want an answering machine or call waiting. It's not that we can't afford it. I've stopped trying to explain to people. Now I let them wonder why I'm so happy and secure these days. Sincerely, Cynthia Ferguson, Byron Center, Michigan. A cabin in the woods approach to simple living. Dear Elaine, I live in Skagway, Alaska, 90 miles north of Juneau. Your book, Simplify Your Life, made it to my morning wake up slowly time this morning. It was a gift from relatives. I had been feeling complicated and rushed lately and decided to see what you had for me. Soon, with a big smile, I realized that I had actually graduated from most of the 100 simplifiers. Thank you for reminding me how most Americans live a crazy, busy life compared to mine. As I looked around my one-room cabin, taking in all 400 square feet of it, I laughed at myself for thinking my life was too complex. I live 8 miles out of Skagway, population 720, in my cabin that has no electricity or running water other than the mountain creek that runs by my cabin. I use the creek for refrigeration in summer and a window box for a fridge in the winter. I can look out my window and see the harbor seals playing and hear the dolphins exhaling out of their blowholes. For exercise, I chop all my own wood and bike the 8 miles to work. In winter, there are no open businesses in town to use me as their bookkeeper, so I have about 5 or 6 months off a year. My quality of life is fantastic. Yesterday I saw both a bear and a coyote in my neighborhood. An eagle follows me to work in the mornings. I have clean air, clean water, and many loving friends. I forget that most people don't live like me and my neighbors. We aren't hippies or revolutionists. We've simply simplified. you'd be amazed at how much you can really pare down. I have hauled up a car battery that I run my CD radio player on, but imagine how much space you'd have without all of your plug-in gadgets. Sometimes we rent movies and watch them at the public library, but the TV was the first thing I was delighted to part with. Thank you for making your great ideas feasible for people who would not be able to make such a big step over to my lifestyle, but perhaps they'd be able to fire their personal trainer or simplify their diet or just smile at their neighbor. Have a great day. Carly Natzig, Skagway, Alaska. What does simple living mean to you? Many of us long for respite from the pressures of the modern world. The temptation is to think that respite would come from leaving it all behind. But as Carly Natzig points out, moving to a cabin in the woods is a big leap. Tempting as it might be to some, escaping to the woods is not the only way one can live a simple life, and it's probably not a realistic option for most of us. It's also not necessary to make such sweeping changes in order to simplify. For many of us, even minor alterations to the lifestyle we're now living can bring significant relief. So take some time to figure out what simple living really means to you. What do you hope to achieve by making some changes that would simplify your life? What would have to happen for you to live more simply? And how will you know when you've gotten there? Can you make some easy changes right where you are? Or would you have to move across town or possibly across country to get to simple? It's possible your ideas of simplifying will change as you go along. Keep in mind that what may be simple for someone else may not be simple for you. You may end up with an entirely different understanding of simple living than the one you start out with. But it's so much easier to reach our destination when we have an idea of where it is we want to go. The things that complicate our lives. Many things make life complicated. Here is a list. Big houses, big mortgages, property taxes, home remodeling, inflation, credit card debt, consumer debt, the national debt, not enough time for our spouses or children, difficult spouses, difficult children, ex-spouses, family obligations, 60-hour work weeks, long commutes, heavy traffic, difficult bosses, obstinate employees, grudging co-workers, demanding clients, work we don't particularly enjoy, work we actively dislike, working too many hours, even if it's work we love, unemployment, social commitments, noisy neighbors, incompetent physicians, delivery people who show up late, repairmen who never show up, contractors we wish had never shown up, publishers' clearinghouse mailings, unrelenting charity requests, telephone solicitors, call waiting, the net, email, junk mail, having too much stuff, having no options, having unlimited options, dieting, health fads, gadgets that don't work, relationships that don't work, illness, choosing an HMO, anger, worry, fear, negative cash flow, inadequate daycare arrangements, tax returns, and blow-in subscription cards, not necessarily in this order. What we can eliminate. Most of us won't be able to avoid complications completely, but we can eliminate more than we think we can. We just have to learn to be selective, and that's a big part of what simplifying is all about. In this list there are roughly a dozen that we probably won't be able to do anything about, not in this lifetime and not legally. Things such as inflation, the national debt, politics, attorneys, publishers' clearinghouse mailings, taxes, bad weather, and blow-in subscription cards. Everything else we can either do something about or avoid in one way or another. Recognizing this will simplify your life. The rest is just details. Remember a time when you were truly happy. Ask anyone past 35 to recall a time when they were truly happy. A lot of people will remember a time in their youth, perhaps a particularly wonderful summer when they had few cares or responsibilities and spent seemingly endless weeks fishing on a quiet stream or lazing by the neighborhood pool. Or perhaps they'll remember the joy of being young and single, or of being newly married and madly in love. They had few possessions to weigh them down. They worked hard, but work didn't consume all of their time and energy. Life was simple. Most of us wouldn't go back to being young and totally independent and having nothing at all to call our own, but many of us would like to recapture the feeling of those carefree days. Sometimes, in the midst of simplifying, things can get overwhelming. If you're changing jobs, reducing your income, letting go of the clutter, cleaning up relationships, dealing with some of the inner issues, or changing your long-established habits, life can, in the short term, seem pretty complicated. So reconstruct your fond memories. Let them help create a clear picture of what simple living means for you. It will stand as a beacon for you in the process of getting back to the simple life. Be willing to change the way you play the game. One of the stumbling blocks to living a simpler life is our inability or unwillingness to change how we play some of the games that got us into these complicated lives in the first place. For example, for many years I was driven by the need to maintain our home to certain standards of cleanliness, organization, efficiency, and so-called style. I realized fairly early on that this was one area in which I wanted to make some significant changes. When the town we live in was considering rationing water, we made the decision to cut back on the amount of laundry we wash. This meant wearing our clothes a bit longer and not changing the sheets and the towels every single week. To my surprise, I didn't have a problem with wearing our clothes longer between washings. Gibbs had once been editor of Yachting Magazine, and we'd spent a lot of time on boats over the years and have learned how to stand downwind from people. But I grew up, as many of us did, in a household where we just changed the sheets and the towels every single week, no matter what. So I had some difficulty reducing the frequency with which we laundered the linens. But nonetheless, the drought forced us to change the way we had always done the laundry. Gradually, I started to change some of my other expectations, such as how clean my floors had to be, that our mirrors have to shine with a brilliant luster, or that our hardwood tabletops have to be polished to a blinding brightness. When you examine these precepts closely, you begin to see how absurd they are. Has anyone ever been fired for having ring around the collar? Would house guests actually leave, never to return again, if we didn't use fabric softener on our bath towels? This is not to suggest that we eliminate house cleaning or laundry routines altogether, but simply that we can set our own standards rather than dutifully accepting those advertised by cleaning product manufacturers. Few of these dictates are determined by actual need or even by our own desires. Many dollars are spent to get us to accept these and countless other ideals, and we've been made to feel inadequate, incompetent, insecure, and dissatisfied, and even socially unacceptable if we don't meet them at every level. In the last 30 years, we've given up time with our families, our leisure time, our sleep time, our money, our rapidly depleting energy, and our own free choice in varying attempts to maintain many of these conventions. In doing so, we have generously lined the pockets of many corporate executives while vastly complicating our own lives. Household cleaning routines are only one area in which we've abandoned our freedom of choice to the strategies of marketing gurus. Few areas of our lives are untouched by products that are designed for the sole purpose of getting us to feel insecure enough to part with our money. Our tastes in clothing, personal hygiene, health care, food, travel, automobiles, children's toys, and practically everything else is manipulated by the pronouncement of those cunning advertising demons. I don't claim to have been able to free myself completely from all of these mostly preposterous decrees. Far from it. I'm still attached to my BMW, and it's unlikely I'll ever be able to let go of my Revlon-generated need for lipstick. But becoming aware of the origin of a lot of these attachments has made it possible for me to simplify in many other areas. It's sometimes difficult to know where to draw the line, but as you start to think about ways you could simplify, think about the number of things you do each day because of standards that were set in a marketing session at Procter & Gamble. You can have a simpler job. For many of us, our jobs and our work schedules have been one of the major complications of our lives. Our material well-being depends on our paycheck. Without our monthly income, how could we eat or make the mortgage or the car payments? Without our jobs, the whole house of cards could come tumbling down. Often our very identity depends on our being employed. And so I often hear people say, I can't simplify my life as long as I've got to make a living. But if you've got a demanding, time-consuming job, that alone might be sufficient reason to simplify your life. Yet, you may not be open to the possibility of making career changes right now. You could well be thinking, as I did, you got to be kidding. There's no way I could quit my job, and I could certainly never work part-time. How could I support my lifestyle if I did? I've got to make a living. And most likely, at this moment, it's true. You can't quit your job. Not today, not tomorrow, maybe not next month or even next year. Once I could see my way clear to simplifying my life, it was not that big a step to begin cutting back my workday to 8 or 9 hours. But it was another year before I could seriously think about unloading the real estate and doing something else. In the midst of a complicated life, it often is impossible to change jobs, or even to think about it. So if the thought of making changes in your job picture presses all your buttons, don't even think about it now. Instead, look at all the other areas of your life you can simplify. Simplifying in other areas will give you some breathing room. It'll give you more time and more energy. It will reduce many of the financial pressures. If you're living more simply, you'll simply be spending less money. Having more time and less stress will open your mind to possibilities you may not even be able to think about now. Eventually, as you pare away all the extraneous stuff, a new way of approaching your present job or an entirely different career option may be staring you in the face. Yes, most of us have to make a living, and we have to look at ways we can support ourselves even throughout our retirement years. But all the people who are now downshifting have proven that many things are possible in terms of career and employment changes for all of us. It is possible to live well and happily on a lot less. By slowing down, by simplifying, by breaking some of our consuming and spending habits, by teaching our kids simple pleasures, and by adopting simple pleasures ourselves, we can create a beautiful, happy, fulfilling life, and we won't have to work as hard as we have been to maintain it. You can live a simpler life. At first glance, the idea of creating a simple life often seems out of the question. When we're in the midst of a complicated life, we think it would be impossible to slow down. When we're constantly racing against the clock, it feels like there's no way to create some extra time. When we're so exhausted from moving 90 miles an hour, we're certain we don't have the energy to figure out how to do things differently. When we're torn between the pressures of work, the demands of our children, and the needs of our inner selves, it feels as though there's no way we could add one more thing, like simplifying, to our list of things to do. But it is possible, and there's a magical, almost exponential quality about time. Once you free up even a little bit of it, other ways will start occurring to you to help you free up even more.